Hey, gang, here we go. The five themes of geography. So before we dive into it, your target for today is that you are able to identify and describe the five themes of geography. But let's take a step back and just try and figure out why we're looking at the five themes of geography. We are in this course going to be learning about the world. It's called global studies after all. And the world is a big, gnarly, radical place. And what the five themes of geography will do, think of it as like a framework or a tool that we can use to start learning about the world and comparing and contrasting different places around the world. Because the world is so big, it's very helpful to kind of chunk it and break it down into kind of easily manageable characteristics and features. And that's what the five themes of geography will do. It will allow us to compare St. Michael to Albertville. It would allow us to compare STMA to Beijing, China. It would allow us to compare Minnesota to Florida, the United States to Botswana, North America to Sub-Saharan Africa. It'll allow us to take two different locations or places around the world and see how they're similar, how they're different, or it will allow us to just look at a place and just learn about it in kind of some different segmented features or aspects. So let's just kind of move on and see what we're going to be doing here. Your five themes of geography, you should have a notes sheet that looks like this. You were given one in class or in your take-home bag, in your materials bag. If you do not have the notes sheet, there is one linked in Google Classroom. I would like you to print it off. Now, if you don't have a notes sheet and you can't print it off, there is the ability to make a digital copy. Just know with the digital copy, it's a copy that we're going to be coming back to all year. Notice, do not throw away. Keep all year as a reference. So that digital copy will live in your Google Drive, and you're going to want to make sure that you can get that organized and kind of find it later. There will be a whole separate screencast for that. We're not going to talk about it right now. But your notes, in addition to taking words and keywords and phrases, in addition to answering the question for each of the themes, and we'll explain what that means, you're also going to be creating images or sketches. Yeah. And I know what you're saying. You're going, Mr. Canton, images and sketches. What's up with that? Why are we doing that? Well, if you are able to visualize these themes in addition to the words, you will find you have a much better chance at remembering them and applying what these themes mean. So you're going to be taking some notes here. And then also, if you're playing along at home watching this video, which you are, keep an eye out for bonus icons. For example, this little green YouTube-ish looking guy, that is like a supplemental bonus feature. And when you click it, it will take you out, in this case, to an extra video that will provide additional info. So as I'm giving you the info, and as you're taking notes, and if you're going, I still don't get it, then if there is a little bonus video, then by all means, click the icon and that will give you some bonus info. Anyway, let's get on with the learning. So the five themes, here they are. First one is location. Second one is place. Third is region, followed by movement and human environment interaction. Location, region, place, movement, and human environment interaction. So location. Location tells us where is it. So maybe somewhere on the side or somewhere right in here on your notes sheet, maybe write the question. Where is it? Because that is what location tells us. Think of it like Jeopardy. If the answer is location, then you would answer in the form of the question. Where is it? Right? Because if I ask you where something is, you will tell me its location. There are two types of location. The first type of location is known as absolute location. Think of absolute location as the exact or specific spot, a dot on a map. So absolute location is often conveyed or given as latitude and longitude. You can imagine kind of a giant map. It's got like a grid. It's got latitude lines, and then it's got longitude lines. And so it can reference a specific point, like 48 degrees north and 72 degrees east. Absolute location could also be a street address like 321 Birch Street. It could be a room number like room H120. But absolute location refers to the exact specific spot on a map where something is. That is absolute location. We use absolute location oftentimes when we're like punching things into our phone, like on Google Maps or GPS or something like that to get us driving directions. But in our day-to-day life, instead of using absolute location, what we more regularly use is something known as relative location. Now, relative location tells you where something is in relationship to something else. Typically, we describe it with landmarks or a direction or a distance. I live 45 minutes away from here. I live about 5 miles west of here. Notice I'm not telling you where I live, and nor will I, but I'm giving you the direction, west, and the distance, 5 miles, or time, right? I could say it's over behind the Mac Shack. We're talking about McDonald's behind the Mac Shack. Yeah. Anyway, on the southern shore of the lake. All of those are relative location. They're not precise. They're not specific. They're not exact. They're relative. Okay. So as we look a little bit further with absolute location, could ask yourself, what is the absolute location of Middle School West, where I'm coming to you from right now? What is the absolute location of Middle School West? Well, in terms of latitude and longitude, it's 45.224 degrees north, 93.659 degrees west. Now, if you were to type that into a GPS machine like Google Maps, it will pretty much drop a pin right here on the building. Don't do it right now. I don't want a pin come crashing through the roof. You could also give the address to Middle School West, 11343 50th Street, Northeast, Albertville, Minnesota, 55301. That is our address. Both of those are specific absolute locations, right? That is our absolute location of Middle School West. So stop and ask yourself, what is the absolute location of where you are right now? I don't know. I'm not with you. It's a rhetorical question. And then we also have relative location. So what is the relative location of Middle School West? You could say that it's a middle school about half an hour northwest of Minneapolis, right? If someone, if you met somebody and they said, hey, where do you go to school? And they say, and you would say, oh, I go to St. Michael Albertville Middle School West. They'd say, oh, where is St. Michael Albertville Middle School West? Well, you could give them the GPS coordinates, and they would look at you kind of sideways and be like, what kind of alien are you? Why are you speaking in GPS? You could give them the address, which would be a little bit more normal, but they'd still be like, I don't know where that is. And then you could say, well, oh, it's 30 minutes northwest of Minneapolis. Or you could say it's in between Minneapolis and St. Paul. Or you could say, do you know where the outlets at Albertville are? It's right near there. All of those are describing the location of our school relative to another, right? Or you could say, if someone in town was like, hey, I'm looking for Middle School West, you could say, oh, well, it's in between Middle School East and the high school. It's across from the cafe, and I can't think of the Tater Tot Cafe. I can't think of the name of it, but you know what I'm talking about. So that's location. Now, in terms of a sketch, I like to think of absolute location as like a bullseye, like an exact spot. Another thing that I like to do with absolute location, I'll just kind of show you another way to draw it, is I like to draw like a little grid with a point. Look at that. You could also use that to symbolize absolute location. And then relative location, you know, you can see on the screen here, I like to think of it as arrows, right? So I could draw, you know, draw my little tree here, and then I could draw my person, and I can say that that person is next to the tree. Wow, look at that. Fancy. Like I said, no judgment with drawings here. Look at that. It's a person next to a tree, but that is relative location. Hey, look at that. Bonus icon. If you're still not clear on the difference between absolute and relative, click the bonus icon. Same, if you're still not clear on what absolute location and latitude and longitude means, click the bonus icon. If you're clear, which I'm going to assume you are, let's move ahead. So that was location. Our next theme, place. So you're meeting somebody and they say, hey, where do you live? And you say, oh, I live in St. Michael, Albertville. And they ask, well, where is St. Michael, Albertville? And you say, oh, it's a suburb just past Maple Grove. It's right off 94, about half hour northwest of Minneapolis. Like, oh, okay, I kind of know where you live. You've given them a location, but then they're like, well, what is it like there? All right, when we talk about place as a theme, which is down here, when we talk about place as a theme, there are two types of characteristics that go with place. The first type is human characteristics. I don't know why we're starting on the right, but we are. Human characteristics. Human characteristics are the things that relate to people, to humans. That could be language, culture, religion, foods that they eat, the design of buildings, right? Roads, bridges. It's all about the people. And some of you get confused on this because I say human characteristics, and you're like, wait a second, how are buildings a human characteristic? Because a building, that's like a physical thing. It's not a human thing. The buildings are not alive. How are buildings human characteristics? Well, who makes the buildings? Humans. Yeah. So human characteristics are those things that are like relating to people or human made, right? You could compare the human characteristics of STMA with Minneapolis. Think about the difference in Buildings, for example, right? Downtown Minneapolis, lots of big skyscrapers. Albertville, maybe 3 or 4 story buildings. Think about the neighborhoods. Minneapolis, the homes are a lot closer together compared to Albertville and St. Michael, where they're a little bit more spread out. So again, human characteristics are all of those things about the people. That's human characteristics. Then on the other side, we have physical characteristics. Those are things that relate to nature or things that are found naturally in your environment. Things like mountains, which we don't have here, rivers, lakes, climate, all of those things, the animals, the trees, the plants, all of those are physical characteristics. Now, the physical characteristics of STMA and the physical characteristics of Minneapolis are pretty similar. Pretty similar climates, pretty similar wildlife and things like that. But you could say, for example, STMA, we have the Crow River compared with Minneapolis, St. Paul, where we have the Mississippi River. You could talk about how in our community we have Beebe Lake, whereas in Minneapolis and St. Paul, you have Lake Bede-Makaska, for example, right? So you can compare and contrast different physical characteristics, even though the climate between the two is the same. Location tells you where it is, but place, again, going to jot down that question. It tells you, well, what is it like there? So again, human characteristics. Think about the human characteristics of STMA. How would you describe the buildings around here? I'd say it's mostly houses and then some schools and then just like grocery stores. And don't forget pizza places. Got a lot of pizza places. Roads, pretty standard roads. We've only got one highway. The people, how would you describe the people around here? When you think about that, you can describe the religion of majority of the people, race and ethnicity of the majority of the people, languages spoken. All of those are specific to STMA, but they're not going to be specific to other parts in the world, right? If you think about the human characteristics of STMA with, say, the human characteristics of Beijing, China, of Berlin, Germany, of any of those places around the world that are not here, they're all going to be different. Okay, what about our physical characteristics? Right? What about the physical characteristics of our community? Now, you live here, you know what it's like here, you know what natural resources we have. A lot of corn, a lot of farm fields, right? Soy, things like that. Thinking about our vegetation, a lot of deciduous trees, a lot of evergreen trees. Thinking about our climate, we've got 4 distinct seasons. We're entering into fall or autumn. We're leaving summer behind, right? So we've got 4 distinct seasons. That's different compared to other parts in the world. So again, place is a way to, once you know where something is, location, then we need to figure out, well, what is it like there? And when we think about what is it like there, we break it down between the human side of things and the physical side of things. So that is place, our second of 5 themes. We've got some images here. Again, put your own images and sketches so you'll notice on the human side of things, I drew a person, his little language, because we're talking about speaking. We've also got our house to show buildings and food and shopping and music. All of those are related to humans. And then on the physical side of things, we've got our climate and our wildlife and our vegetation and just anything really natural and relating to our natural environment. So make sure you're putting in your sketches there as well. And that will take us to our third in this first part of the 5 themes kind of notes, but region. So region is maybe a bit of a tricky one. So just kind of stick with me. The question with region, though, is what characteristics are similar or different to other areas? So let's break this down, and region will make a little more sense to you in a second here. So a region is an area with similar characteristics and features, right? A region is an area with similar characteristics and features. So you could have a physical region. So let's think about the United States for a second. You could talk about the Great Lakes states of the United States. So that'd be like Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan and Illinois, right? All of those states that border the Great Lakes. That's a physical region of the United States. You could talk about the Rocky Mountain states of the United States. Those are all the states that the Rocky Mountains run through. That's a physical region. You could talk about the Gulf Coast states of the United States, talking right around the Gulf of Mexico, right? You know, places like Texas and Alabama and Mississippi and Florida. Those are all Louisiana. Those are all the Gulf Coast states. So those are all physical regions. Around the world, you could talk about the Mediterranean countries around the world. So we're talking about all of the countries that border the Mediterranean Sea, right? So those are, again, just all physical regions. What do all of those places have in common? What are their similar characteristics? Well, if we're talking about the Great Lakes states, it's that they all border the Great Lakes. So Florida would not be considered a Great Lakes state. It doesn't border the Great Lakes, right? It's not in the club. Sorry, Florida. So there's a physical region. You also have human regions. And human regions are either defined by humans, as in we draw the region ourselves, like we get out on the map and say, hey, I declare thee a region, more on that in a second. But it could also be related to like social or human characteristics or economic characteristics, right? You could talk about, for example, the coal producing states of the United States. And those are states where coal is big. That would be like an example of an economic region. You could also talk about the Iron Range of Minnesota. That is a range or a region of Minnesota defined by an economic region. And what is the main economic force in that region? So we're talking about northern Minnesota, and that's the Iron Range. So those are all examples of human um, regions. You could talk about the Midwest, and we'll look at a map on that in a second. You could talk about the Arabic speaking world, and that would refer to all the countries around the world where they speak Arabic. You could talk about the Spanish speaking world, all the countries around the world where they speak Spanish. You could talk about the Hindu region of the world, and that would be the region of the world, predominantly India, where Hinduism is the most dominant religion. So those are all human regions. What are some regions of Middle School West? So let's start local. Think about the building at Middle School West and what would be some different regions of our building. One example would be the Blue Steps, right? That's a specific kind of region and area. What makes the Blue Steps region a Blue Steps region? Well, it's the giant Blue Steps. You could talk about the eighth grade wing. It's mostly eighth grade classrooms. There's a couple of seventh and a couple of sixth, but it's mostly eighth grade classrooms, right? So we're breaking down our building into smaller chunks or regions. What about some regions of STMA? Well, you could talk about the outlet mall area. That's over by the outlet mall. You could talk about the Highlands, right? That's a neighborhood within our particular community. And you could think of that as a region. What about some regions of Minnesota? Well, you could talk about the Twin Cities. So that includes Minneapolis, St. Paul, surrounding suburbs. You could talk about the North Shore, referring to kind of Duluth and beyond. You could talk about the Iron Range, right? Those are all different regions of Minnesota or different smaller areas of Minnesota. Um, Here's a map just kind of showing the world. Like I said, you could have like sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia. Those are different regions of the world. Here's some other maps. Just talking about just kind of maps, regions of the United States. You've got the Midwest. Minnesota happens to be a part of the Midwest, according to this particular map. But here's a different cultural region map of the United States. This one, if you really take a look, this one breaks it down to like 30 some odd different regions of the United States. And here we can see Minneapolis, St. Paulish, we're part of Region 7, which is part of the Midwest, but we're part of a sub-region known as the Upper Midwest. But then we also have something called the Northwoods. This particular map calls the Northwoods, lost my light, got to move around. There we go. All right. So again, these are all just different regions. They're not exact. They're not precise. Somebody drew this map, so it's not like it's up for interpretation, I guess is what I'm saying. Because you could look at Duluth and be like, oh, that's not part of the Northwoods region. That should actually be part of the Great Lakes region. And the Great Lakes should, that's up to you. Regions are fluid. They're dynamic. They change. Here's some different regions again of Minnesota. So Minneapolis, St. Paul is in the Twin Cities, but here we are in Wright County. Wright County itself, just our county, that's a region of Minnesota, right? Now that's a man-made region. Someone drew our county down here. Let's enhance that, right? Someone drew Wright County. They drew the county borders, but Wright County and STMA were also part of the central region of Minnesota. Minnesota itself is a region of the United States, and you could say Minnesota is part of the Midwest region of the United States, and you could say that the United States is part a region in the world. So think about that for a second. You could talk about North America as a region of the world. Then you could talk about the United States as a smaller region. Then you could talk about the Midwest as a smaller region of the United States. And then you could talk about the upper Midwest as a smaller region of the Midwest. And then you could talk about Minnesota. You could talk about central Minnesota. You could talk about Wright County. All of those are different regions. And again, a region, just you need to ask yourself, well, what characteristics does it have in common, right? Central Minnesota is going to be different than Northwest Minnesota. It's going to be different than Southern Minnesota. They're going to have different characteristics and features. So again, that's region. You could also think about region, and one way that I like to think about region, you don't have a deck of cards handy, but if you did, you could shuffle up that deck of cards. And I'm just going to shuffle up a deck of cards that I have here. So think of it like this. Here we have our deck of cards, and within that deck of cards, we've got a lot of like individual smaller cards. And I'm just going to take the first, what do I got? 6 cards here. I've got 6 cards, and I could break these cards into smaller regions. Now I've got, and I know this might be kind of hard to see, but I've got some, there we go. I'm going to go a region of 3s and not 3s, right? 3s and not 3s. I could go red region and black region. Right. So again, these 3s, let's just focus on them for a second. Let's just focus on the 3s. Within the 3s, what characteristic do they have in common? Well, they're all 3s. That's what separates them from the rest of my cards. But notice this little 3 right here, it's also a black color compared to these red colors. So these red ones, in addition to being part of the 3 region, they're also a part of the red region. We could also say, you know what, let's go and make them a part of the odd region. So notice that regions, like I said, multiple places can be a part of multiple different regions depending on how you are breaking them down or depending on what characteristics you are looking at for those regions. Anyway, those are our first 3 for today. We looked at location. It tells us where is it, absolute and relative, specific, compared to one another place. We talked about place, which tells us what is it like. They're the natural characteristics and the human characteristics. And then we ended with region, talking about how we can further chunk and break up different places. That's what we've got for our first of 3 themes. Our last 2, human environment and movement, we'll get that in our next video. Hope you're doing well. Talk to you later. See ya.